Hello everyone, my name is Cédric Huylebroek. I'm a PhD candidate at KU Leuven, and today I want to talk about the supply chain spillovers of private equity buyouts. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen a boom in private equity activity, and in fact, private equity funds have witnessed a 4-fold increase and currently manage over 4 trillion in assets under management, with expectations that this will grow to 10 million in assets under management by 2030. Now, clearly this makes PE investors key financial players with significant influence over the real economy. Now, despite this boom in PE activity, policymakers and labor unions increasingly raise concerns about the potential adverse effects of private equity buyouts, which has even led to legislative responses such as the Stop Wall Street Using Act in the US, which aims to curb private equity activity. Now, despite this criticism, many academic papers actually find that, at least in the private sector, PE buyouts actually positively affect their portfolio companies. So there's previous research showing that after being acquired, PE targets, they expand activities, they improve innovation, and they improve their managerial activities. Now, while the impact of private equity buyouts on target firms is well documented, firms are obviously part of very complex production networks. Yet we lack any evidence on how supply chains contribute to PE investors' ability to create and potentially extract economic value. And so why is this important? And if it is so important, why has nobody tried to address this question? So there's at least 2 reasons why this is important. The first is that critics often argue that PE investors have very short-term value creation strategies, which may conflict with the long-term nature of supply chain relationships. Second, and more broadly, understanding the supply chain spillovers of private equity buyouts may improve our understanding of how the real economic effects of PE buyouts actually affect economic activity. A key issue in addressing this question is the demanding data requirements, given that production network data usually doesn't exist, and even if firm-to-firm sales data is available, it only covers very large publicly listed companies, while 90% of PE buyouts actually involve very small private firms. And so in this paper, together with Olivier de Jonge from the National Bank of Belgium, we overcome this data limitation by using unique production network data from Belgium that covers all firms in the entire economy, combined with Belgian PE buyouts in order to study the supply chain spillovers of private equity buyouts. Now, an additional reason why this is so important is that actually in recent years, practitioners and policymakers have raised increasing attention about how PE buyouts actually affect the suppliers of target firms, which is exactly what we will focus on in our paper. And so theoretically, the supply chain spillovers of private equity buyouts are ambiguous in the sense that, on the one hand, assuming that PE buyouts indeed create value for their portfolio companies by improving their managerial practices or by allowing them to pursue new growth opportunities, while suppliers may benefit either from increased demand for inputs or from knowledge spillovers and technological transfer. On the other hand, even if PE funds create value for their portfolio companies, they may do so at the expense of the suppliers of those companies. For instance, by renegotiating long-term contracts in order to cut costs for their own portfolio firms. Now, using the unique data from the National Bank of Belgium, we can address this question by combining production network data and PE buyouts and using a difference in difference model in order to compare the economic trajectory of treated versus non-treated suppliers, where the treated suppliers are the ones who have customers that are taken over by PE targets, and the non-treated suppliers are the ones that do not have customers who are taken over by PE targets. And so using this very simple economic model, we obtain three key findings. So the first is that on average, PE buyouts positively impact suppliers through increased demand for inputs. So what happens is that when a firm is taken over by a PE fund, it expands activities and pursues new growth opportunities. And this actually benefits the suppliers by receiving increased demand for inputs, leading the supplier to increase in sales, employment, profitability, and so on. Now, that being said, we do not find any evidence that there's alternative channels. So it doesn't seem that there are knowledge spillovers or technological transfer that actually help suppliers to outperform their peers. The second key finding is that this pattern changes during economic downturns. So during economic downturns, we still find that PE targets themselves, they continue to outperform their peers and to grow faster. But the suppliers of those firms, they cease to outperform their peers. So they lose some of the positive spillovers that we documented in the first result. And so this can entirely be attributed to the fact that PE firms, they exert greater pressure on suppliers of their portfolio companies than other firms would exert pressure on their suppliers. And they also more actively reconfigure their supply chain in order to realize cost savings for their own portfolio companies. And then lastly, the third finding is that we also find that there is crowding out effects of PE buyouts through common supplier networks. So remember that suppliers benefit from increased demand for inputs. Now, some of these suppliers may be capacity constrained, in which case they might prioritize serving their faster growing PE-backed customer over other customers. And so this is what we see in the data, where after having a PE-backed customer, suppliers are more likely to drop other customers who tend to be competitors with the PE-backed customer. Which makes sense if you think that competitors tend to rely on the same inputs. So if suppliers are capacity constrained, they tend to drop the other customers who would require the same inputs. And so in general, we think that despite academic and policy interest into the real economic effects of private equity buyouts, our study provides the first evidence on how PE buyouts actually impact supply chains, offering novel evidence on the network effects of PE investments, and also improve our understanding of how PE investors create and extract value and the potential product market implications that arise from this through common supplier networks.